This video is basically for the class that we're doing on June 8th, and this is about teaching the leadership on the ground and taking it into the saddle. So there's some basic things that we're working on when we're teaching a leadership relationship between a person and their horse. And the leadership is not based on who's boss. It is based on allowing the horse to make decisions and then demonstrating the horse the leadership that you're asking for. So one of the simplest commands that we do with these horses is to develop a desire for them to want to follow. And so the way we're going to teach that is standing with your horse at say about 3 or 4 feet of line in your hand, and we're going to make a walk around the horse. And if you're not the object of their focus, they will probably ignore you. And so I'm going to demonstrate what we're going to do, then I'm going to talk about what we're not going to do in terms of this particular lesson. So this lesson is this: just walking off, and the horse is to come along and follow you, but you're not to drag it in terms of turn around and face the animal and pull on it. So let's pause for a moment, make this walk around again. You're demonstrating here the leadership that you're asking for, and because you're making a direction around the horse is making a decision to walk off with you. And on these lessons that we're going to be doing in this class, what we're trying to do is teach the horse a decision by our body language, not by pulling on the horse. And so as we progress into this lesson that we're doing on the ground, it's based on the horse making a decision about you, not about the fact that you're pulling or trying to control the horse with a line. A good example of that is in leadership relationships with horses, between horses. There are no lines attached. So it's all about body language. So that's what we're teaching in this lesson. And these lessons that we're doing are not to replace other lessons. This is a lesson. This is a way to create a positive leadership relationship. But it's not to cancel out anything else that anybody does with their horse. This is just a way of doing it. So in this lesson, as I just demonstrated, that's the beginning. That's the first thing that will be worked on, is the ability for the horse to make a decision to come with you without any attachment. In other words, without it dragging the horse. Now, when I mentioned a moment ago about what not to do, if you make this choice to walk off and have the horse follow you, and you do that, right there's a bit of a block. So as I do this, if she were to stand still and ignore me as I continued my journey around her, I would not turn around and start to pull on her to get her to come. It has to be a flow of your body language moving, and not anything but that. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to step into is the yielding of the hindquarter and yielding of the forehand. Now the reason that we are doing these two maneuvers is because these are the two maneuvers that horses do in their everyday life in communication with other horses. They always yield their hindquarter, yield their forehand, but you don't typically see, although they will back up to get out of the way of another horse, and that can be a lesson as well. But in this particular lesson, we're teaching the displacement of the hindquarter, and we're going to walk into the hindquarter here and just continue to move into this hindquarter without pulling on the horse, preferably. So what we're looking for is this displacement here, and after we get that, we step back and just pause. Because what you're doing is you're stepping back and creating the distance between you and the horse that you want to be consistent. Excuse me. It's almost a knee-jerk reaction if the horse is too close to use a command to back a horse up, whatever it might be. But this is about body language. And so we're setting these horses up for this kind of a thing. So when we make these decisions for the horse, we want to move around these hindquarters. This is where the horse is stationary in the front and moving the hindquarters in the back. Okay? Now, The natural position of a horse after they disengage their hindquarters, like when this horse disengages her hindquarter and she completes that step, as soon as she crosses over completely, which she hasn't done yet, that inside foot here always steps back. So when that inside foot steps back, that is the kind of the preparation to be able to move the forehand. So we cross over the hindquarter, step, and that foot steps back. So when that foot steps back, now the front feet can move through. And so we're always setting up our lessons based upon the timing of their footfall so that they have an open door to make a decision. So we're not trying to force something that they're not prepared to do. So that's an observation that we'll always make, is what the horse does at the conclusion of a step, so that you know you're in position to move the other end of the horse. Now we have choices of making decisions of only moving the back feet like I just did there, or only moving the front feet, where we'll do this with the horse. Step in, and you want your body position to move the horse, not the fact that you're doing this kind of stuff at the horse, although you may have to do that to initiate a decision. So that's moving the forehand by itself, and we move the hindquarter by itself, and then we'll be able to step through. This is called walking through the forehand, but we want to walk through enough that she actually closes up that hindquarter, so she's just stepping the front feet like that, and then getting that kind of a crossover. So that is a simple thing in demonstration, but because your horse may or may not be yielding to you, it can pose a little bit of confusion between you and your horse when you're teaching it. And so that's obviously the purpose of the class. Now the next portion of this is kind of a dance. And what we'll do is if you're on the right side of the horse like this, and I start my procedure to move the back feet, I'm going to create a position by putting the end of the rope in my right hand. It'll be just the opposite on the other side. It'll look like this. So we step through that hindquarter, step back, lift up, step through this side. Step through, changing my hands on the rope, step back. Now we have that front end yielding. This is a kind of a dance with the horse. And the idea of these lessons is that your suggestion causes a decision. So if we don't get the movement we want, we step back into the hindquarter, move this forehand over, and your body approach to the horse is what causes her to yield that, because it causes your horse to yield to your approach. Now one of the things that you're going to run across possibly is that when you're yielding, if you get the horse to yield to move the hindquarters, and now you're going to move the front feet, your temptation will be to walk over here to push the horse over there, and you never want to do that because we're talking about yields. So if I want her to go to my right, which is her left, I don't want to walk over there. I want to offer this suggestion. I want to walk straight in here because my approach is what yields that forehand. Now these lessons are what cause horses to have confidence. And they have confidence purely because they understand what they're supposed to do. I think a good example, and I'll mention this in the clinic, is that when you see horses in a group, when they're in a group, there'll always obviously be a leader, but you don't see the horses standing there just fidgeting when they're in a group. They'll move if they're required to move, but they don't stand and fidget. Now, when we see people with horses on a lead line, a lot of times you see horses going around the person, trying to eat something, looking all over the place and so forth. And those horses are just bothered. In other words, they are not in control of themselves. And this is what we're trying to accomplish. We don't want to control the horse. We want the horse to be in control of itself. So now let's say, for example, if this may not happen with her, but if she were to look over here to a cow or look over here to a horse, as soon as she looks over there, I'm going to step over here to draw her focus back to me. All the time that I have a relationship on the ground with the horse, I want that horse to be in focus on me, not looking around and being just observant of lots of different things, but paying attention to everything that I do. So when I see her make those decisions, that's all I'm asking for her to do, is just keep her focus on me. Now the next portion of, we've done the moving of the hindquarters individually, moving of the forehand individually. We've demonstrated kind of what the dance looks like, and that of course will be something that will be a little bit kind of a timing issue as you're learning how to do it. And the next thing is a loose line leading. Loose line leading would be like this. So I'm going to set this horse up into the pivot, offer that open door, step in, and walk off with the horse. And I want to walk at a distance from the horse, and as she's walking, if I drop back a little bit into the hindquarter, that causes her to turn without any tension on the line. Step into the hindquarter, there's a turn. As I walk straight, then she'll walk straight. Step into the hindquarter, there's a turn, walk straight. Now as I start to drift into her, this is where she starts to drift away from me. So the loose line leading is really, really important, because you're setting up a leadership relationship by your language, where you are in the relationship and so forth. So this is kind of a nutshell of what you're going to be doing in the class, but I'm doing this so that you can look back and refresh yourself if some of this gets lost in the translation. So I hope this will be helpful to you when it comes time for and after the clinic, that you can look back on it and get some kind of reassurance of it. Now another thing that'll happen a lot of times that you'll see, particularly in a lesson like this, is your horse will start to possibly block you from one side. So if I'm going to walk over here, if she moves her head and completely shuts me off, which she's not doing there, she's just positioning herself, but if I move in one way and she tries to say, I don't want you over there, if I'm working with a horse here, I will take advantage of that and not force the issue to be on the other side, but work with the horse so that she can give me that permission to be on either side. Now that might seem like a little thing, but this is a horse's language, and they're doing the best they can say, they can do to say, I don't feel comfortable with you over there, I don't feel comfortable with you over there. And so you want to get to the root of that comfort, not force on the horse, because depending on an individual horse, if you start pushing through their emotion, in other words, their emotion is saying, I don't want you here, and you start pushing through it, on some horses you can start to create a building block of problems. So all these little things are really, really important to pay attention to, because it's part of your relationship between you and the animal. There's different ways to approach a block. One of them is, if I were to go over here and let's say she was going to block me, as soon as she blocked me, I would go this way. If she blocked me that way, I'd go that way, and start to work on these blocks until I can get, for example, if I go all the way around here and I was able to beat her block and move these hindquarters, and so here I can come in and she probably won't block me. That's one of the ways of working on it. In other words, you take advantage of the horse's decision. So if they try to block you on this side, you go back to the hindquarters. When they move those hindquarters and they set themselves up where I can see, the horse can see me with its right eye in this case, that's where they kind of open that door for you to go through that other side. And it might seem like a little thing, but it's important to work through so that you have permission to go either side of the horse. Now, here's a good example where the horse comes into you and you want a space available, that you want your space respected, so you can step into this horse. And when I walk in here, I'm offering her the best deal to move those feet. If she doesn't, I'm going to ask her to move them a little bit more assertively. So there's not a thing wrong with that, because that's what another horse would do. The other horse would always offer, because they're approaching, they'd offer that horse to make the right decision. If it doesn't, then things change a little bit until it does happen. So that's the authority. You're not being abusive to the horse at all. You're showing the importance of recognizing your approach. One of the things you can do if a horse is on a blocking lesson is, if she were to block me Of course, it's hard to show it unless she does, but if she were to block on one side or the other, you can take that block and then say, okay, I'll start moving the forehand only. And so what you're basically doing there is making the wrong thing difficult and the right thing easy, and you just use the horse that way. And if that shows up in the clinic, we'll certainly be addressing that so people can get a feel for how to do this. But one of the things I think, for me anyway, it's I'll use that occasionally, but if the horse is persistent about blocking me, I will do what I did, and I'll stand and watch the horse and then see if I can make a decision to come this far and make a decision to come this far. Now, if you have a horse that's consistently blocking you and you finally do get over here, the best thing you can do is just stand here. Don't proceed into the lesson, but just stand with the horse. And that lets the horse know, okay, well, there's nothing bad going on here. Because when we're first doing these lessons, there can be some insistence and aggression that shows up. And then the horse can, in their association, they'll think, oh gosh, I don't want you over there because I have to move if you do that. And so this is kind of a work in progress all the time, getting your horse to make these decisions. So what I was getting at a moment ago, when there was a space relationship, I wanted a little bit more space. Instead of backing the horse up, I want to use the displacement of the hindquarters to demonstrate by me moving them and stepping back and saying, this is my space. So if she starts to step in to my space, this is where you're making that wrong thing difficult. Instead of, if you back the horse up, the horse doesn't really relate to the fact that they don't belong in there. They just say, oh, he wants me to back up. But there's not an association that takes place about the space. So anytime that you're doing this kind of a thing, it's in this particular lesson, as I mentioned, we were doing a lesson. So in this particular lesson, you want to try to influence decisions from your language, not from resistance. Now, in the class, there may be resistance show up because you have a horse that doesn't understand anything about what's happening. They get a little fearful and their flight instinct comes in, and we'll work through that when that happens. But that's the process that we're looking at on the ground. And the reason that we talk about this class being taking ground management to the to the saddle, because what we're doing is taking confidence. In other words, you build confidence in your horse here by they realizing what's required of them. So then when you get in the saddle, you take that same confidence into the saddle. So and in this case, because what we're doing here, we're making decisions for the forehand and decisions for the hindquarter. In the saddle, we're going to do the same thing. Now, as this lesson evolves, when we start doing this kind of thing, there's sometimes a lot of work goes into getting the animal to be completely understanding of what we're doing, so it takes a lot of time to work into it. Now, when we're in the saddle, we want to make sure that we're taking the time to show the horse what it is we intend to do with them. Let me see if I can get this mounting block over here. I know this is a small horse, but mounting block, I think, is the most humane way to mount the animals. Nothing wrong with getting up from the ground at all, but it does create a strain that's not necessary. Okay, so from the ground, or from the saddle, basically these decisions are decisions for the forehand movement or for the hindquarter movement or for the forehand isolation or the hindquarter isolation. So when we're moving these animals moving the hindquarters, disengaging the hindquarters. Same thing I mentioned on the ground, moving the back feet and the front feet are the most natural displacements that a horse makes in their daily life. So when I pick up and want to make this decision here, the first requirement is that your horse is soft in the bridle. If you have to pull your horse's head, then you know that there's work to be done there on that particular lesson. So you want the horse soft in the bridle, and then your leg will come slowly to find the contact of the horse. We're not trying to, it's basically your calf that's going to move the horse, not your ankle. You're not trying to poke a spur in there. So when she gets soft in the bridle and my legs start coming slowly, that contact is basically just barely touching the horse. And this is obviously a pivot on the forehand, or it's also a displacement of the hindquarter, disengagement, whatever you want to call it. So when we are now going to ask for the forehand to move, the rein that's moving that's opening the door for the direction, in this case it'll be to the right. This rein moves where your hand is over an area that I call the hole, which is the space between the horse's shoulder and the rider's foot, that open space there. So if I pick this up and she touches that, that's where these front feet move over into that position. All we're trying to do is make a foot placement, not a circle. So I open this door, and then my right leg will come in and barely contact the horse, not the left leg, but the right leg, behind the cinch. Now, depending on how people have been educated or are doing education, sometimes you'll see a person to move the forehand, they'll throw this foot forward. If you throw that foot forward, you're changing your hip. You want to be aware of that. The only purpose for your leg here is it causes energy into a decision. So if I'm going to go to my left and this leg comes back, this rein is barely touching her neck, this is the open door, so now those forehands move over, and now you have your hindquarter pivots. And in this class we are not interested in a full circle pivot, we're interested in the foot placement for the first lesson. So now what we did on the ground where we were doing the little dance, in the saddle, it's going to look like this. Excuse me. I'm going to take that hindquarter, move it over, and once the horse stops, now the horse's head doesn't change locations, just the rider's leg changes location. Her head's to the left, this left leg comes back, the back feet move, right leg comes back, front feet move. Left leg comes back feet move, right leg comes back, front feet move. So that's all there is to it. That's just the exchange of the front. It's called, one of the terms for this, at least the term I use, is called an inside-outside decision. And we call it inside-outside because when you flex a horse to one side like this, is now the inside of the horse. So whatever side the horse is flexed to, that is the inside. All inside commands always move the back feet. So she's inside here, I use the same leg, that's designed to touch the horse and ask these back feet to move out of the way. So now when we have the horse in the same shape, same flexion, this outside rein is barely touching her neck, and now the right leg comes back as the energy for the decision, and now the front feet step through. Okay? So this is it's a simple lesson, but it also can be a challenge sometimes, because in a lot of our riding we don't think so much about making a specific or precision decision. We're turning left, turning right, whatever, but we're not really concentrating on how do these foot placements take place. If we're going to be teaching a spin as an example, we want to be able to teach the introduction step, the first step, the leading step that starts the decision. And when the horse will take the leading step every time, and so you're only asking for that foot placement, that's when the horse will eventually understand how to take the second, third, and fourth steps. Okay? Now, there's a lot of variables to this. This particular lesson, working the forehand and the hindquarter, I refer to as the four corners of the horse. In my understanding, my commitment, this is the foundation of the horse. So this is where we build from. And when you have when you have a nice selection by barely contacting a horse to move those hindquarters, and this was where your haunches in comes from, this is where your flying lead changes come from, this is where your practical lead change comes from, or simple print lead change comes from, and so this is a foundation for many, many things. And so I hope this lesson, this introduction to this will be helpful for you when you look back on this. See you on, when will we see you? See you on Saturday.